That's why this entire situation feels way more complicated than a simple viral clip or a roster storyline. Because underneath all of it, there's another battle happening that nobody is fully saying out loud yet. The battle for attention. The battle for momentum. The battle for who becomes the next face of women's basketball moving forward. And once you start looking at it through that lens, everything suddenly feels way more intense. Because now every viral moment matters more. Every player movement matters more. Every public reaction matters more. And that's exactly why the conversations around Hailey Van Lith have started sounding different recently. People aren't just talking about basketball anymore. They're talking about image,
fit,
visibility, pressure, expectations, and whether certain situations around major programs were actually as stable as they looked from the outside. Because let's be honest, when players connected to huge programs suddenly become part of new conversations, fans immediately start reading between the lines. They start revisiting old situations, old reactions, old rumors people ignored before. And social media makes all of it even crazier, because one viral moment can completely redirect public attention overnight. One clip can suddenly make an entirely different player become the center of discussion. And when that happens, programs that are used to controlling attention suddenly find themselves reacting instead of leading. That's where things start becoming unpredictable. And honestly, that unpredictability is exactly what people around women's basketball are feeling right now. Because nobody fully knows where all this momentum is heading next. Some believe this is just the natural evolution of the sport becoming bigger than ever before. More stars, more viral moments, more personalities exploding into mainstream attention. But others think something deeper is happening. They think the hierarchy inside women's basketball is quietly changing in real time. Not officially, not publicly, but socially, digitally, through momentum and visibility. And trust me, in today's sports world, that matters almost as much as what happens on the court itself. Because once fans emotionally attach themselves to a player or storyline online, everything changes afterward. Media coverage changes. Pressure changes. Expectations change. Even how players are viewed entering games changes. And right now, MiLaysia Fulwiley's viral moment feels like one of those moments people might eventually look back on differently later. Not because of the move itself, but because of what started happening around the sport immediately after it. Because suddenly people are paying attention to different names, different programs, different futures. And at the same time, situations connected to LSU and Hailey Van Lith are being looked at through an entirely different lens than before. Which means this isn't just about highlights anymore. It's about momentum shifting in ways nobody can fully control once fans and media lock onto it. And honestly, that's where the real pressure is only beginning. And once momentum inside a sport starts shifting in ways nobody can fully control, that's when the real tension begins building behind the scenes. Because now it's no longer just about who's playing the best basketball, it's about who's controlling the conversation. And right now, the conversation around women's basketball feels more unstable than it has in a long time. Because every few days, another clip goes viral, another player explodes online, another storyline suddenly takes over social media before anyone even has time to process the last one. And that pace is changing the entire culture around the sport, especially for high-profile names like Hailey Van Lith. Because whether people admit it publicly or not, expectations around her have always carried extra weight. Every move she makes becomes debate material instantly. Every performance gets analyzed differently than most players. And once someone reaches that level of visibility, even silence around them starts creating speculation. That's exactly why fans started connecting her name to this situation so quickly. Because while MiLaysia Fulwiley was becoming the center of attention publicly, people quietly started asking what all this meant for players and programs that were already carrying enormous spotlight pressure before this moment happened. And trust me, those conversations are getting deeper now. Because some fans think this new wave of attention is healthy for the sport. They think women's basketball finally has enough stars, personalities, and viral energy to keep growing at a completely different level than before. But others? They think this shift is creating pressure nobody fully understands yet. Pressure on programs, Pressure on players. Pressure on expectations. Because once the internet locks onto certain names, everything changes afterward. Suddenly players aren't only being judged by wins and losses anymore. They're being judged by visibility, social media impact, viral moments, attention, and whether they're moving the culture enough online. That's a completely different type of environment than women's basketball had even a few years ago. And honestly, not every program is fully prepared for how fast that environment is evolving. Especially programs like LSU that already live under constant national attention. Because when a program becomes known for producing stars and viral personalities, the spotlight never really leaves. It just keeps getting heavier every season. And eventually, that attention starts affecting how everything around the program gets interpreted. Roster moves, player chemistry, social media activity, even random reactions fans normally wouldn't notice suddenly become major talking points online. And that's exactly what's starting to happen around this entire situation now. Because fans are no longer just reacting emotionally to highlights anymore. They're building narratives around them. Narratives about who's rising, who's falling, who's becoming the future face of the sport, and who might quietly be losing control of the spotlight they once dominated. That's why the reactions around MiLaysia Fulwiley's viral move felt different from the beginning. People weren't only impressed, they were treating it like a statement, like proof that another major shift inside women's basketball is already happening whether certain programs are ready for it or not. And once fans start viewing moments through that kind of lens, things become impossible to fully slow down afterward. Because now every new clip becomes evidence for whatever storyline people already believe. If a player succeeds, fans say the shift is happening. If a player struggles, fans say pressure is getting too heavy. If a program stays quiet, people call it strategic. If they speak too loudly, people call it defensive. There's almost no neutral ground left once attention reaches this level. And honestly, that's why this moment feels so important right now. Because deep down, people can sense the sport itself changing in real time. The energy feels different. The speed feels different. The emotional investment from fans feels different. And players are now entering an environment where public perception changes almost overnight depending on one performance or one viral moment. That's a dangerous amount of pressure for anybody to carry consistently. Especially players who already entered the spotlight with huge expectations attached to them from the beginning. Which brings everything back to Hailey Van Lith again. Because whether fair or unfair, fans naturally compare every major storyline to the players who already dominated headlines before. They compare attention levels, compare reactions, compare momentum, compare who seems to be winning the internet at any given moment. And that creates another layer of pressure most people outside sports never fully notice. Because now players aren't only competing on the court anymore. They're competing inside the attention economy too. And right now, that battle feels more intense than ever. And once athletes start competing inside the attention economy as much as they compete on the court, that's when situations become way more unpredictable than most fans realize. Because now talent alone isn't controlling the narrative anymore. Visibility is. Momentum is. Perception is. And right now, perception around women's basketball is shifting almost weekly. One week, everybody is focused on one player. The next week, a completely different name takes over social media with one viral clip, one huge performance, or one unexpected storyline nobody saw coming. That's why this moment surrounding MiLaysia Fulwiley and Hailey Van Lith feels so much bigger than people originally thought. Because underneath all the reactions and highlights, there's another reality quietly developing. The power structure around women's basketball attention is changing. And trust me, programs around the country absolutely notice it. Because attention now affects everything. Recruiting, media coverage, brand deals, fan loyalty, even how networks decide which players and teams get pushed hardest into the spotlight. That's why viral moments like MiLaysia's insane move don't just stay fun highlights anymore. They become signals. Signals that a player is becoming bigger culturally, not just statistically. And culturally relevant players change the direction of sports faster than people expect. Especially online. Because social media doesn't reward consistency the way sports traditionally used to. It rewards moments, emotion, shock value, personality, replay value. And MiLaysia Fulwiley just delivered one of those moments that instantly forces the basketball world to stop and pay attention. Which means now every major player connected to the spotlight naturally gets pulled into the conversation too, including Hailey Van Lith, because fans are already comparing situations without even realizing they're doing it consciously. Who has momentum right now? Who feels like the future? Whose name is dominating conversations? Whose visibility feels strongest? And once those comparisons start spreading online, they grow unbelievably fast. Especially because women's basketball fans are emotionally invested in these storylines more than ever before. They don't just support players anymore. They defend them, debate them, build narratives around them, and sometimes completely turn situations into rivalries that weren't even originally intended to exist. That's why this entire atmosphere feels so intense suddenly. Because now every player under the spotlight is carrying pressure from multiple directions at once. Pressure to perform, pressure to stay visible, pressure to maintain momentum, pressure to meet impossible expectations created online before games even happen. And honestly, that pressure can quietly change the energy around entire programs over time. Especially when fans start treating every new moment like evidence of some bigger shift happening underneath the surface. Because look at how people reacted after MiLaysia's clip exploded. They didn't just celebrate the move itself. They immediately started talking about what it means, what it says about the future, what it says about the hierarchy of stars in women's basketball, what it says about which players are becoming the faces of the next era. And once conversations reach that level, things stop being simple very quickly. Because now every major player gets evaluated through a completely different lens afterward. That includes Hailey Van Lith. That includes former LSU stars. That includes programs already operating under heavy spotlight pressure every season. And honestly, that's why certain reactions around this whole situation still feel so cautious. Because deep down, people understand how fast sports narratives can flip. Today, one player is the center of hype. Tomorrow, another player becomes the main storyline. Today, one program controls the spotlight. Tomorrow, another viral moment changes everything again. And when momentum keeps shifting this quickly, nobody stays fully comfortable for long. Especially not inside major programs where expectations are already overwhelming before seasons even begin. That's why you can feel people watching more carefully now instead of speaking confidently. Because everybody understands the next few moments around women's basketball could shape public perception for months moving forward. One more viral performance changes conversations again. One emotional interview changes conversations again. One unexpected transfer, partnership, or breakout moment changes everything again. And honestly, that unpredictability is exactly what's making the sport explode in popularity right now. Because fans feel like literally anything can happen at any moment. New stars appear overnight. New rivalries develop instantly. New storylines take over social media before traditional media even catches up. And once a sport reaches that kind of emotional unpredictability, growth happens incredibly fast. But at the same time, so does pressure. Because now players aren't just representing themselves anymore. They're carrying fan expectations, online narratives, media debates, and constant public attention every single time they step into the spotlight. And right now, it feels like the pressure surrounding these names is only getting heavier. Especially because the basketball world is clearly waiting for the next major moment already. Waiting to see whether MiLaysia Fulwiley's viral momentum keeps growing. Waiting to see how situations connected to Hailey Van Lith continue evolving. Waiting to see which programs adapt best to this new era where visibility and basketball success are becoming completely tied together. And once everybody starts waiting for the next moment before the current one even settles down, that's usually the clearest sign that the sport itself is entering a completely different era than before. And once a sport officially enters a new era where visibility becomes just as important as performance itself, that's when everything around the players starts changing faster than anybody can control. Because now every single moment carries potential consequences far beyond the game itself. And honestly, you can already feel that pressure building around women's basketball right now. Because fans are no longer just watching games anymore. They're watching personalities, watching reactions, watching confidence, watching body language, watching who looks comfortable inside the spotlight and who looks overwhelmed by it. And that's exactly why this entire situation surrounding MiLaysia Fulwiley, Hailey Van Lith, and the growing LSU conversation suddenly feels way more intense than people expected at first. Because underneath all the highlights and social media reactions, there's another reality forming quietly in the background. People are starting to choose sides. Not officially, not publicly all the time, but emotionally, digitally, through who they support, who they defend, and whose future they believe in the most moving forward. And once fans start emotionally dividing themselves between rising stars and existing stars, the atmosphere around the sport changes immediately. Because now every success feels bigger. Every struggle feels more dramatic. And every new viral moment starts getting treated like proof of some larger shift happening across the entire basketball world. That's why MiLaysia Fulwiley's clip exploded the way it did. Yes, the move itself was incredible. But what really pushed it into another level was the feeling attached to it. The feeling that fans were witnessing somebody taking a huge step into the spotlight in real time. And moments like that create emotional momentum that spreads unbelievably fast online. Especially because people are constantly searching for the next face of women's basketball now. The next breakout personality. The next superstar. The next player capable of controlling conversations beyond the court itself. And once that search begins publicly, every major player becomes part of the comparison whether they want to be or not. Including Hailey Van Lith. Because people naturally start measuring momentum against momentum. Who feels hottest right now? Whose clips are everywhere? Whose name keeps showing up online? Whose energy feels like it's growing instead of slowing down? And once fans start asking those questions constantly, it creates unbelievable pressure behind the scenes. Because now players aren't only trying to succeed in basketball anymore. They're trying to survive inside non-stop public attention at the same time. And honestly, not everybody handles that pressure the same way. Some players thrive in it. Some players quietly struggle underneath it. And some programs eventually realize the spotlight itself can become harder to manage than the actual games. Especially programs connected to major personalities and huge expectations already. Which brings everything back toward LSU again. Because whether directly or indirectly, almost every major conversation in women's basketball somehow keeps circling back toward LSU lately. The attention never really leaves. And that creates a completely different level of intensity around every storyline connected to the program. Every former player movement becomes bigger. Every reaction becomes bigger. Every rumor becomes bigger. And when another star like MiLaysia Fulwiley suddenly captures massive internet momentum at the exact same time conversations around Hailey Van Lith continue evolving, fans naturally start treating it like part of a much larger shift happening around the sport. Even if nobody fully understands the shift yet. That's why reactions around this entire situation still feel so emotional online. Because deep down, people know the sport is changing rapidly. The audience is growing. The attention is growing. The pressure is growing. And whoever controls momentum during this era could shape the future direction of women's basketball for years moving forward. That's not exaggeration anymore either. Because we've officially reached the point where one viral moment can completely change how a player is viewed nationally overnight. One clip can add millions of views. One conversation can suddenly push a player into mainstream sports culture instantly. And once that happens, the expectations attached to them multiply immediately afterward. Which means the real challenge actually begins after the viral moment happens, not before. Because now everybody wants to see what comes next. Can the momentum continue? Can the attention stay consistent? Can the pressure be handled once the spotlight becomes permanent instead of temporary? Those are the questions fans are really asking underneath all these reactions right now. And honestly, nobody fully knows the answers yet. That's why the atmosphere around women's basketball feels so unpredictable at the moment. Because there are too many rising personalities. Too many major programs competing for attention. Too many storylines exploding online simultaneously. and too much emotional investment from fans for things to stay calm for very long, which means this entire situation probably isn't slowing down anytime soon. If anything, it feels like we're only watching the beginning stages of where all this attention is eventually heading. Because once a sport starts generating viral stars this quickly, everything accelerates afterward. Rivalries get bigger. Expectations get louder. Fan debates become more emotional. And pressure surrounding the players becomes heavier than ever before. And right now, it feels like women's basketball is standing right on the edge of that explosion moment where the attention surrounding the sport reaches an entirely different level than anything we've seen before. Which means every move from here matters more. Every reaction matters more. And every new viral moment has the potential to completely reshape the conversation again overnight. And now you understand why this situation feels way bigger than just one viral clip or one player update, because what's happening around women's basketball right now honestly feels like the beginning of a completely different era. The spotlight is shifting. New stars are rising. Old expectations are getting challenged. And the pressure around these programs and players is becoming more intense every single week. So now I want to hear from you. What do you think really happens next? Is MiLaysia Fulwiley becoming the next major face of women's basketball after that insane viral moment? Or do you think players like Hailey Lith are still about to remind everybody why they've been under the spotlight this entire time? And honestly, do you think LSU still controls the biggest attention in women's basketball right now? Or are we starting to watch the balance slowly shift toward a new generation of stars and programs? Drop your real thoughts in the comments, because this conversation is getting bigger every day, and trust me, some fans are already treating this like the start of a whole new chapter for the sport. If you enjoyed this video, hit that like button, because it seriously helps push these conversations out to more basketball fans who are paying attention to what's really happening behind the scenes. Subscribe right now if you want more women's basketball drama, viral moments, hidden stories, and the real energy building around the sport before everybody else catches on later. And definitely turn on notifications, because with the way things are moving right now, the next huge moment could happen literally at any time. And when it does, you already know we'll be here breaking all of it down.